Welcome to Tucker Carlson Today. At the foundation of any free society is the freedom of speech, the right to say what you really think, the right to believe what you want, the right to think for yourself. That right is going away at high speed across the West, and with it the civilization we fought so many wars to defend. That's real. It's beyond debate that it's happening. What's so interesting is to see how individuals respond to that change. The overwhelming majority of people go along with it because they feel they have no choice. They're afraid. But there's a small number of people who won't go along with it, who've decided, as Jimmy Cliff famously said, I'd rather be a free man in my grave than live as a puppet or a slave. We try to highlight them on this show because it's worth seeing the lesson they teach the rest of us. The bottom line is, at a moment of great change like this, people change because they have to make stark decisions. And maybe no one has changed more on stage, in public, for the world to see than Piers Morgan, who's been a journalist for decades. You've seen him a million times on television. He filled Larry King's old spot on CNN for a while. He's been around a long time. But recently, in the middle of all this chaos, Piers Morgan has taken stands that have really cost him. And so we thought tonight it'd be worth talking to him about why he did that. Piers Morgan is editor-at-large for DailyMail.com. He's also the author of Wake Up, Why the World Has Gone Nuts. He joins us now for his first interview since he left the show Good Morning Britain. Piers Morgan, we are grateful to have you on today. Thank you so much.
Good to be here, Tucker.
Thank you. This is a long and complicated story, and I'm because we're speaking primarily to an American audience, I want to give context for it, and I want to start with a clip at the middle of the story. This, I think, looking back, will be the moment that kind of changed the trajectory of your life, and that changed a lot of other people as they watched it. Here's the moment that you walked off the set of the show that you hosted.
Understand that you don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times on this programme. A number of times. You continue to trash her.
OK, I'm done with this.
No.
Sorry, no. Sorry.
Do you know what? That's pathetic.
You can trash me, maybe not mine.
No.
See you later.
I'm being...
Sorry, can't do this.
This is absolutely diabolical behaviour.
So looking back, I'm convinced you're going to see that as a pivot point in your life. You probably already do. Fill in the context around that moment. How did you get to that place? What happened before that moment?
So that was the Tuesday after the Monday show, in which we had debated almost in real time the Oprah 90-minute wine-a-thon with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. And that had aired in America several hours before we did on the Monday morning. And I watched it in truncated form. They took out all the commercials and just let me see it straight before we went on air. So it was like undiluted wine-a-thon. And I watched this thing with mounting unease to start with, incredulity by the end, and a real sense of anger, because what I was witnessing was the most extraordinarily disingenuous smear hit job on the royal family, on the Queen, on the monarchy, and frankly on Britain, my country. And I was not going to have it. And so I went on air on the Monday morning and I gave it back with full bells on. And I said quite clearly that I didn't believe anything Meghan Markle was saying. And here we are a month later, Tucker, and frankly, I've had plenty of time to think about this, and I've had plenty of time to analyse all the analysis of what she was saying and what Prince Harry was saying, and I still don't believe what they were saying. And in particular, I don't believe what Meghan Markle said. 17 different claims by the pair of them have now been proven to be either completely untrue or massively exaggerated or unprovable. And I don't understand really why I should have to believe people who are not telling the truth. So that was the context of what happened on the Monday. Because I said I didn't believe Meghan Markle, a huge furore erupted through the day. I was an outrage. I wasn't allowed to have an opinion that I didn't believe what she was saying, even though it was clear to me in real time, as I was watching the interview, that there were a number of things which just couldn't be true. You know, she claimed they got married 3 days before the big global wedding we saw on television. I knew that couldn't have happened because she said it was just the two of them with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the most powerful churchman in Britain. That's illegal. If that had happened, just the three of them, the Archbishop would have been arrested for breaking the law. So there were things like that where I thought, well, that's not true. But that was not allowed to be in a position I could adopt. I was told that you've got to believe Meghan Markle, and if you don't believe what she's saying, you're a racist.
So let's go through a couple of the claims that she made in that interview. Not because she is an inherently interesting person, but because the reaction, I think, tells us a lot about where we are. So here's one. Here's Meghan Markle, the Duchess from Los Angeles, saying that at one point she felt suicidal. And then we're going to play after that your reaction to her claim. Here it is.
Look, I was really ashamed to say it at the time, and ashamed to have to admit it to Harry, especially, because I know how much loss he's suffered. But I knew that if I didn't say it, that I would do it, and I just didn't want to be alive anymore. And that was a very clear and real and frightening, constant thought. And I said that I needed to go somewhere to get help. I said that I've never felt this way before, and I need to go somewhere. And I was told that I couldn't, that it wouldn't be good for the institution.
OK, again, let's have the names. Who did you go to? What did they say to you? I'm sorry, I don't believe a word she says, Meghan Markle.
Well, that's a
I wouldn't believe it if she read me a weather report.
Now, why? I wouldn't believe it if she read the weather report. Sort of an interesting thing to say, since it was the weatherman later in the story who caused such a problem for you.
Yeah.
But let's go to that specific claim. She says, I felt suicidal and the royal family essentially told me to shut up. You don't believe that. Why?
Well, I made the point, I clarified exactly what I meant. I said, look, it's not for me to say whether she felt suicidal. That's only for her to know, and I couldn't possibly say. What I was taking issue with was that she claimed she went to two members of the royal household, a senior aide and also to human resources. And she told both of them that she was feeling suicidal and needed help. And both of them rejected that and said she couldn't get help because it would be bad for the brand of the royal family. I just find that impossible to believe, that you would have two people in the palace who would be that callous to a woman telling them that she was suicidal. But also there's the position of Prince Harry in all this. He is attached to many of the biggest mental health charities in Britain. He makes no secret of his desire that everyone who feels depressed or anxious or has suicidal thoughts should get immediate help. And yet here was his wife who says she was feeling constantly suicidal, and Prince Harry never sought to get her help. And I find that very hard to believe, frankly. So I was really just, I think, being a journalist, saying, look, you're making these incendiary claims. You're accusing two people in the palace of being unspeakably cruel, simply to protect the brand of the royal family. If that is true, let's have the names of these people, and let's go to them and ask them, is this true? Did you tell a suicidal woman who told you she was suicidal she was not allowed to get help? Because I just find that impossible to believe. Now, I'm prepared to be proven wrong, Tucker, about all of this. But all I can say is that on every fact that Meghan Markle came out with that she claimed was fact that we've been able to check, almost all of it has been proven to be untrue. Hence my skepticism in the moment, and hence my increased skepticism as I sit here today.
At the heart of the outrage over your skepticism is her identity. Now, Meghan Markle has, I suppose, one African-American parent, which in the United States doesn't make you white, it makes you black. I mean, that's a whole different conversation that I find confusing. But in any case, she is now officially an African-American, and your skepticism over the claim that we're about to play, I do think undergirds a lot of the outrage. So here is Meghan Markle suggesting that the royal family is racist.
Also, concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What?
And
Who is having that conversation with you? What?
so,
There is a conversation. Hold up.
There's
Stop
several
right now.
there are several conversations.
There's a
about it.
conversation with you
With Harry.
about how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
So here's how you responded to that moment between Oprah and Meghan Markle.
Angry to the point of bawling over today. I'm sickened by what I've just had to watch.
OK, a number of people might be upset.
Sorry, you can
and
come to
moved
you
by
can
what they
defend
heard.
it in a minute. I'm just going to say what I'm going to say.
OK.
This is a 2-hour trash-a-thon of our royal family, of the monarchy, of everything the Queen has worked so hard for, and it's all been done as Prince Philip lies in hospital. They trash everybody. They basically make out the entire royal family a bunch of white supremacists by dropping this race bombshell without...
What's that phrase?
They didn't name which one it was. They just throw it out there so it could be any member of the royal family. And Harry says, I'll never say who it was. Well, you better say it fast.
So the reason I want to play that is I really think that's where your life changed, and that clip right there. Tell us what you were I think you were pretty clear in your explanation, but fill it out a little bit for us. Why were you so angered?
Well, the Queen is the head of the Commonwealth. She's 94 years old. She's been on the throne for 68 years. Now, whatever your view of the monarchy, or the Queen for that matter, she's the longest serving ruler of any kind in the world right now. And she has huge, huge respect from many people in Britain and indeed around the world. She's also head of the Commonwealth, which has many countries which are predominantly with black citizens. So you look at this and you're accusing the Queen and the monarchy and the institution of being racist. That's really what was going down here. And there were two central charges, Tucker, for this alleged racism. One was what we've just heard, where Meghan Markle said there were several conversations while she was pregnant in which Harry was having a conversation several times, she said, with a member of the royal family who was talking about the potential skin colour of the child. Now, we don't know who that was. We don't know what the context of that conversation was. Was it, as Thomas Markle, her father, said to me the next day, as innocent as somebody saying, hey, given her father is, Meghan's father's white, her mother's black, what colour would the baby be? I think that's an innocent question, unless it's loaded with a sense of derogatory tone or concern, and then it becomes racism. We simply don't know, and we don't even know who's supposed to have said this. But then Harry was asked the same question, and Harry didn't say it was several conversations when Meghan was pregnant. He said it was a conversation that happened way before, at the start of their relationship, years before Meghan said it happened. So now we have a massive inconsistency. One conversation, not two. Maybe a year and a half, 2 years before Meghan said it happened. She didn't even hear it. We don't know the context. We don't know what was said. And the second charge involved this allegation she made, which was even more incendiary to me, which was that Archie, their boy, had been banned from becoming a prince because of his skin colour. Now, that is completely untrue. It's not just a sense of her lived experience being untrue. It is factually incorrect. That boy was never going to be a prince until Prince Charles, Harry's father, becomes king on the death of the Queen. And that's going to happen whatever the skin colour of Archie's mother. That's set in stone. It's been the case for 100 years. So for Meghan Markle to try and create a story that says that the decision to not give Archie the title of prince was based on his skin colour is a lie. Now, is she deliberately lying? Is she completely delusional? I don't know. And frankly, I don't care. What I care about is only one person decides titles like that, and it's the Queen. The Queen is not a racist. And yet here we have Meghan Markle, with the support of the Queen's grandson, directly accusing the Queen, because she makes these decisions, of being racist and stopping that boy becoming a prince because of his skin colour. And many millions of Americans have simply accepted this to be fact because Oprah Winfrey didn't challenge that presumption. Oprah didn't know that this couldn't possibly be true. So the two central charges of racism against the royal family, one we know very little about,
and may not have been racism at all. The second one is based on an untruth. And, you know, the idea that the royal family and the Queen in particular are now being depicted as a racist entity, a racist queen presiding over a racist monarchy when she's the head of the Commonwealth, I'm sorry, I find it completely disgusting. And someone's got to say it. And I should be entitled to hit back and say, no, I'm sorry, facts, to quote the famous phrase, don't care about your feelings or your lived experience. If you're going to accuse people of racism, then you better put up some facts and not the untruths on which you've based your so-called lived experience.
I'm confused by their position, and I think you've done a great job explaining why this can't be true. But if you accuse someone of a moral crime, don't you have to identify the person? If I say I was mugged at gunpoint, I'm not going to tell you who mugged me. You have every right to question whether I was mugged or not, don't you?
I think if you're going to accuse people of racism, and I have a real vested interest in this debate, because I have been accused of racism simply for disbelieving Meghan Markle, who we now know was not telling the truth throughout that interview. And I feel very angry about that and very aggrieved about that. And I've seen friends of mine like Sharon Osbourne being removed from their job for defending me because apparently they were defending a racist. I've seen Don Lemon at CNN, the guy who sits in my old office, who I thought was a friend, actually say on his show that I had committed an act of racism. By disbelieving somebody, that's an act of racism. So you have the Queen, and frankly, every member of the royal family is still smeared with the idea it may have been them who expressed concern over the skin colour of Archie. Well, did they? And if so, who was it? As a British taxpayer who helps pay for the royal family, I'd like to know, actually, if there's a real racist inside the palace. I've met the royals many times. I don't believe they're racist at all. In fact, the only member of the royal family who has had to publicly apologise for being racist is Prince Harry, who a few years ago had to apologise after using a deeply offensive racist term about a Pakistani soldier that he was working with. And he used other racial slurs as well in that story which was published in one of the British tabloids, which may explain his hatred of the British tabloids. But he's the only one. And isn't that ironic? That never got mentioned by Oprah Winfrey. And it should have been mentioned. You know, my problem with this whole interview was that these incredibly damaging allegations were tossed out there, and none of them were challenged properly. None of them were challenged based on actual reality. Or none of them were asked, well, who is this person?
I think it's fair to say, this is my opinion, but that at the most profound level, Oprah is a dishonest person, and she has an agenda that is never stated, but it's very obvious if you watch. So I'm going to stop tormenting you with sound bites, but I just want to put one more on the screen. This was the moment that I think the fill-in weather guy shows up to join the pile-on and berate you, and the implication is that you're a racist. Here's the moment.
Let me ask you honestly, on the issue of race, she has now got the whole of America and the worst of the world, frankly, looking upon the palace, the monarchy, the Queen, everyone in the royal family as a bunch of racists. Is there a difference? If it was said, perhaps in all innocence, right, and they just said, oh, what colour baby might you have, without any suggestion of it being a concern or a worry if it had darker skin, would that in itself, would just the question be racist?
That in itself is fine, but you have to think about how it feels on the receiving end, because what we're speculating is as to how that message...
Yeah, I don't know how it was communicated.
Where did that come from? What was that really about? I mean, this is a guy who wouldn't seem to have moral or journalistic standing to lecture you about anything, and yet he does, presumably to his benefit. What's the backstory there, if you don't mind telling us?
Well, the backstory is he's the stand-in weather guy who does the weather occasionally. He's not a journalist, but he's somebody that I've helped with his career a number of times when he's asked me to. And he's somebody who occasionally takes part in our debates in the way that you might see Al Roker do on the Today Show, similar kind of thing. But he's not there very often. But I had specifically asked for him to come in that morning
because he'd sent me a private message in which he expressed, some concern about what he felt was I wasn't really understanding where Meghan Markle was coming from as a biracial woman. He was himself biracial, and he wanted to explain to me. I said, well, come on air. Let's have the conversation. But the moment he came on air, he came with a pretty premeditated attack on me on a pretty personal level. And frankly, I just wasn't going to have it. Now, I walked off for a few minutes. Then I realized this is stupid. I shouldn't have walked off. You should always be able to have a debate. I was angry in the moment that he was trying to personalize this, make out I had some personal vendetta about Meghan Markle, which I don't. And I came back, and we then had a pretty lively and quite enlightening, like half-hour debate about this. But I couldn't persuade him that on this issue, for example, of Archie being a prince, that because we knew by then this was untrue, that it was nothing to do with his skin colour and all to do with the fact that the grandchildren of the monarch become prince or princess. And because Archie, at the moment, is a great-grandchild, unless his father, like in Prince William's case, is the heir to the throne, then he was never going to be a prince until Prince Charles becomes king. And I tried to explain to the weather guy, Alex, look, Meghan Markle can claim all she likes that this is racism and that it's her lived experience. And he tried to argue it's her lived experience. You've got to respect it. I said, but how can I respect it when it's based on a falsehood? It's just not true. So she's either completely delusional or she's deliberately lying, hoping that the American audience that she's mainly talking to are going to believe that she was the terrible victim of racist oppression, which I don't think she was.
So it seems like you've checked every box on the journalism checklist. You got your facts right. You thought deeply about the subject you were commenting on. You were interesting. And by the way, you made great television. I think that show was it was the first time you were #1 in Britain. And so you kind of fulfilled all of your duties as a journalist, and yet you lost your job. How did that happen?
I was hired by ITV to do the morning show Good Morning Britain because they were struggling in the ratings. They weren't making much impact. It was a new show. They'd been going just over a year, and they wanted me to come and shake things up. I was a highly opinionated columnist for the dailymail.com. Everybody knew that. I had a lot of opinions on Twitter. Everybody knew that. I was hardly a secret that I was highly opinionated. But they're always honestly held opinions. And I feel strongly about stuff, as you do. And I've come on your show many times, even though we disagree about stuff. Guns would be an issue where you and I would lock horns and have a very, passionate debate about. But that doesn't stop you having me on your show. And it doesn't stop me being able to respect your opinion, even though it's different to mine. What I found was over 5 years, we trebled the ratings on Good Morning Britain. The last day, ironically, was, as you said, the first day we beat the BBC ever. And we had trebled our ratings. So you would have thought people might be thanking me. Instead, I was basically corralled into a position where I was told you've either got to apologise for effectively disbelieving Meghan Markle's version of events here, or your position is untenable and you have to leave. And, I went for a long walk, Tucker, around West London, where I live. And it was a beautiful sunny day, crisp sunny day. And I lost my manager, John Ferreter, a couple of years ago. He was a great guy. You knew him. He was very close to me. He nurtured my career for many years. And I really wished in that moment I could talk to him. And I kind of, was trying to think what he would be telling me. And I knew what he'd be telling me. And it was, trust your gut. What does your gut tell you about this? And my gut was, I was going to be damned if I was going to apologise for something that I believe. And I just wasn't going to go down that road. I've seen too many people, when they're bullied by the woke brigade, into apologising. We saw it with Sharon Osbourne. She was bullied into apologising for defending me against a disgusting slur that I'm a racist. And rather than the person who was accusing her apologising to me, Cheryl Underwood, for accusing me falsely of being a racist, Sharon had to apologise for her passionate defence of me, and then she lost her job anyway. We saw recently the editor of Teen Vogue. Before she could even start, she apologised for years about stuff she tweeted as a 17-year-old kid. But that wasn't enough. So apologies don't ever get you anywhere. So I spoke to my bosses again. I said, I'm really sorry.
but just on a fundamental point of principle. I'm not going to apologise for something I believe. And I don't believe Meghan Markle. Now, what I didn't know, and what was a fascinating thing to discover after I left, was that Meghan Markle, between the Monday and Tuesday, had made a personal complaint to the boss of ITV, Dame Carolyn McCall. I didn't know that. I was never told that. I don't know what pressure she was directly putting on, but she did, I know, personally contact her. I also know she had personally contacted, along with Prince Harry, Ofcom, which is a government regulatory body designed to regulate what we put out on news shows. So I was under attack from Miss Markle, both directly to my boss and to the government regulatory body, under attack to basically conform to her version of events. And I had to believe her. And if I didn't, I was a callous racist and I should be condemned and ultimately, as it turned out later that day, lose my job. And I think that's a pretty perilous slope that we're sliding down. If people like Meghan Markle can spew what I consider to be a lot of disingenuous falsehoods on global television to 50 million people, unchallenged in the main by Oprah Winfrey, and when a journalist does a journalist's job, which is to express skepticism about some of the more outlandish claims, like the secret wedding, like the story about Archie becoming a prince and so on, even down to small stuff like she'd never had any interest in the royals when there are pictures of her draped over Buckingham Palace railings when she was a teenager and so on. I should be able to be a journalist and question the veracity of those statements. And frankly, I should be allowed, in a democracy that values freedom of speech, I should be allowed to say, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. But I wasn't. I wasn't allowed to do that. It was Meghan's way and Meghan's narrative and Meghan's truth. That phrase was actually used by Oprah Winfrey. This is your truth. What does that mean? When do we get to your truth? This is the kind of defence that it was the kind of thing we would hear liberals attack Donald Trump for reinventing facts, for creating his own truth. But when Meghan Markle does it, the same liberals that attack Donald Trump cheer and applaud and say, this is her truth and it must be believed. And if you don't believe it, you're a racist. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not a racist. I just don't believe her.
And no one points out the kind of underlying irony is that here you have two of the most powerful people in the world, in Oprah Winfrey and Meghan Markle, both claiming to be victims. They're oppressed. They have more power than you. They got you fired, but you're oppressing them. The strong pretending to be weak in order to crush people below them. Does anyone notice this dynamic?
Well, it's completely absurd, frankly, and I've written about this regularly for the Daily Mail, about the ludicrous hypocrisy of this couple who, by the way, contrary to what many Americans have been led to believe, the press coverage of these two right up to the wedding was completely over-the-top euphoric. Everyone in Britain was thrilled that finally we were having a non-white bride in the royal family. It hadn't happened. We were all very happy about this. I wrote about how wonderful it was on the wedding day. So this narrative that from the start she was bombarded with horrible, hateful, racist press coverage is another disingenuous load of nonsense, fueled by the Oprah Winfrey Show, where they flashed up a series of headlines, many of which have been deliberately cut to create a misconstrued impression. And many were actually from American tabloids, not British. But no, this narrative had to be believed, that Meghan Markle was targeted for her skin colour by the beastly British tabloids. I never saw that. I don't believe that. I'm a former British tabloid editor myself, and I would know if there was racist coverage in the British papers, and there wasn't. There may have been on social media, because that's a cesspit, we know that. But I didn't see it in the mainstream British press. But really where this leaves us is that you've got this concept that somehow Meghan Markle, who married into one of the richest, most privileged families in the world, and within a couple of years has gone back to her home in California, is living in an $11 million mansion, is doing all sorts of enormous deals with Netflix, Spotify, you name it. They're taking the checks, hundreds of millions we read. And how are they getting those, Tucker? They're getting them because they're the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. They're getting them off their royal titles. The royal titles bestowed on them by the very institution that in the interview with Oprah Winfrey, they say they can't stand and is suffocating and traps them and so on and so on. Well, you can't have it both ways. If you really believe that way about the royal family and the monarchy, give up your titles, but they won't do that because it makes them too much money. So now you have these two oppressed people living in a mansion in California, earning hundreds of millions of dollars, in the middle of a pandemic that's killed nearly 3 million people, portraying themselves as the biggest victims in the world, and doing it to Oprah Winfrey, their great friend who was at their wedding and is their neighbor. I love Oprah. She did my first show at CNN, and I'll always be grateful to her. And she's a wonderful interviewer and entertainer. But this wasn't really an interview. This was her allowing two friends the platform to spray gun Britain, the monarchy, the royal family, the Queen, Prince William's wife, you name it, they took them down. And that's fine. That's their decision. It's their life. They can do what they want. But to do it when you're still calling yourselves Duke and Duchess of Sussex, I'm sorry, that is rank hypocrisy. And I think there's a lot of anger in Britain, which may not be understood in America. But a lot of anger building in Britain towards what happened in that interview, towards the very ugly smearing of our Queen, particularly at a time when her husband, Prince Philip, who's 99, was fighting for his life in hospital. Everything about this was tacky, tasteless, disingenuous, and I'm afraid, I believe, in some cases, downright lying on a global scale.
I said I wouldn't play any more sound bites, and it is hard to pick the most amusing claim from this ludicrous fraud, Meghan Markle. But if I had to pick, it would be this. Here she is telling America that in the middle of the most widely covered interview of the year, she's being silenced. What?
That's the sad irony of the last 4 years, is I've advocated for so long for women to use their voice. And then I was silent.
Were you silent or were you silenced?
The latter. I came to understand that not only was I not being protected, but that they were willing to lie to protect other members of the family, but they weren't willing to tell the truth to protect me and my husband.
I'm sure it hasn't escaped your notice that moments after she complained about being silenced, she called your boss to silence you.
I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up, frankly. You know, the week before, Harry had been on an open-top bus going through Beverly Hills with his friend James Corden. This is the Prince of Privacy, right, who was talking about his private life and the lives of his family on an open-top Hollywood star bus. The lack of self-awareness of these two is, frankly, breathtaking. But this idea that Meghan Markle was silenced. Meghan Markle guest-edited British Vogue magazine in the middle of her silence. Meghan Markle made 73 public appearances, many of which she spoke at during her extended period of being silenced. Meghan Markle claimed that she had her passport taken away, so she couldn't fly. Yet miraculously, she took 14 flights, some of them on Elton John's private jet, while she was simultaneously, along with Harry, lecturing us about our carbon footprint. You know, there are so many ridiculous whoppers in this interview that, frankly, in the end, you know, saying I would believe her would be like saying I believe Pinocchio. It's like, why would I?
Well, I'm just concerned. I just want Meghan Markle to have a voice, and it doesn't sound like she has one. Maybe Sir Elton can help. No, I don't want to belabor the focus on the royal family, because I think what's happening to you is a much bigger story than anything they're doing. But I just have to ask you this, because I can't resist. What's their future exactly? I mean, she clearly is such a transparent operator, obviously. I mean, the end game isn't to, like, you know, live with him for the rest of her life. Could it be?
Well, she has a track record of ditching everyone and everything when they cease to be of use to her. So my advice to Harry is make sure you remain of use. And his primary use, it seems to me, is he's got a royal title. And she has been ruthlessly exploiting that title to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And, you know, good luck to them if they can get away with it.
But I think Americans should be onto this by now. It's like, how much money would they be making if they weren't the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for their anodyne views on a podcast or Spotify? Zero, right? Would they be getting the Oprah Winfrey 2-hour wine-a-thon slot if they weren't royal? Of course they wouldn't. Would they be on an open-top bus going through Hollywood with James Corden if they weren't royal? No. So their entire existence is now being financed by their royal connection, the same royal connection which they spent nearly 2 hours lambasting on global television and saying how much they hate it. It's not just inconsistent. It's not just hypocritical. It's actually shameful. And to do this to the Queen, who has barely put a foot wrong in 68 years of dutiful service to my country, and is one of the most beloved figures around the world, and certainly, even if you don't love the royal family, certainly one of the most respected. She's met every world leader there is to meet in 7 decades. She is a respected woman because she's earned that respect. And I wonder, what is the game plan for Harry and Meghan? Do they carry on plummeting to the bottom in terms of spewing ever more lurid details? We know that within several days of the Oprah interview, that Prince Charles and Prince William, who are our future 2 kings of Great Britain, both called Prince Harry to discuss the interview. And the reason we know that, incredibly private information, and remember, Meghan and Harry, 2 of the most private people in the world, if you believe them, the first thing they did was tell Gayle King, Oprah's best friend who hosts the CBS morning show, who then broadcast this to the American people, that not only had Charles and William called, which in itself was an invasion of their privacy, but that the calls had been unconstructive, they hadn't gone anywhere. She's basically spinning the future monarchs of Great Britain. And that's just, it's disrespectful, for one, but to do it to your own family. This is Harry's brother and his dad that they're doing it to. I don't know how they can trust them again. If that was my family, could you trust a family member if every time you call them, they immediately ring the anchor of a big American breakfast show? So again, complete hypocrisy, invading other people's privacy whenever it suits them, but all to keep the pot boiling and making themselves talked about, which ultimately is their only currency. They're not making almost money through talent. You know, Meghan was an okay actress on a show not many people watched. I happen to like it, but not many other people watched it. It was, it was a reasonably okay semi-hit show for a few years. What's Prince Harry done? I'll tell you what he did do, which won him the great respect of Britain, is he went to war. This guy went to war. And, you know, my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, taught Harry at the Sandhurst Military Academy and said he was a fine young soldier and a very courageous man. What's happened to that guy? What's happened to that guy? That he's turned into this whiny brat in his mid-30s, complaining his dad isn't still financing everything that he does. You know, complaining he was cut off by daddy and his millions. Actually, that wasn't true either. It turns out Prince Charles had carried on financing him. And remember, Harry inherited millions when his mother died. And, you know, I knew Princess Diana well. And I think she'd be horrified by the split between Harry and his brother. I think by the schism now between Harry and the royal family generally, by the appalling smearing of the Queen, which is already causing damage in some of the Commonwealth countries who are buying in to this outrageous lie that the Queen is somehow racist, presiding over a racist institution. So I'm afraid I predict we're going to be hearing a lot more from them, and we're going to be hearing a lot more royal secrets from them, because that's their currency. And without that, they're just another couple of celebrities now on the huckster trail.
And less interesting than most celebrities, even, I would say. The saddest part of this story, from my perspective, since we have similar jobs, I know what it's like to work with people on the set, was what your co-host said about you. Someone I assume, Susanna Reid, I think is her name, who I think it seemed like you had affection for her. And you leave the show, and then the next day or the day after, she effectively reads this statement kind of softly denouncing you on the air. And it felt poignant to me watching this. It felt like she was doing it at gunpoint. How did it make you feel?
I didn't particularly like it. Susanna, my co-host for 5 years, is a good friend of mine. I honestly think she was in the grip of fear. I think she was fearful that if she went too far in saying nice things about me, the same thing might happen to her, that there would be a huge Twitter pile-on. This is how it works. You know, there was no real mainstream media interest in what I said on that Monday show. It was all being driven online by a very orchestrated mob. And these people, Tucker, they call themselves liberals. There's nothing liberal about them. I've just written a book called Wake Up, and it's my clarion call as a liberal myself to these woke liberals to wake up, to really wake up, and to start actually being liberal, because that means you listen to other people's opinions and you respect them even if you don't agree with them, that you engage in debate, in civil discourse about things. But that's all gone. Now there's no room for debate. It's their way or no way. And if you dare to defy the woke narrative about anything, then they will weaponize things like race or mental health, whatever it may be, to get people cancelled in their eyes. Now, I'm not a victim, and I haven't been cancelled. I'm here talking to you. You're the #1 rated cable news star in America. So, you know, this is a very comfortable form of cancellation for me. And I'm sure I'll be absolutely fine. I've had a lot of job offers. But in a way, what happened to Sharon Osbourne was even more disconcerting to me. To see a good friend of mine who'd been on a show called The Talk. Let's remember that. It's a show called The Talk, which I'd appeared on many times with Sharon and with her co-host Sharon Underwood. She was taken down very deliberately. And it was all because she dared to tweet that I was entitled to my opinion. And then because she said that on Twitter, she was attacked on her own show by her co-host, who said that that effectively was her supporting someone who'd said racist things. And when Sharon got annoyed and said, well, what did he say that was racist? They couldn't say anything because I never have. And yet now Sharon's gone too. So I look at this cancel culture. It's a real thing. This woke mob want to cancel people who do not follow the narrative. And it's got increasingly dangerous. I look at that poor young journalist who got fired from Teen Vogue before she even started. And I asked myself, well, what about the other members of that editorial team? Should we go back to their tweets when they were 16, 17 and see what's lurking there? We already know from one of them one of the complainants didn't live up to the holy level that they were setting for this woman. But this young woman's career has been completely trashed, burnt at the woke bonfire, because she was not allowed to be contrite. She wasn't allowed to express a sincere apology for stuff she spouted when she was a kid. It's ridiculous.
Watching you get canned on the very day that you reach the top of your profession, as I was watching this, I kept thinking, this must be changing him inside. And you're right, and you're not, in some sense, you're remaining true to yourself. So you win ultimately because you're not groveling or demeaning yourself, debasing yourself. You haven't lost your dignity in this. But it still had to be bewildering to you. I mean, that's kind of not what you signed up for at all. So how did it change you?
Well, I tell you, it's very interesting because if you believe Twitter, I got my comeuppance rightly and deservedly. You know, the woke mob had met, their court had met. I'd been convicted summarily. Meghan Markle complained to my boss, complained to the government regulator, and I was gone for not apologising for disbelieving her. But then I began to walk around in West London, and I've done that for the last 4 weeks. 4 or 5 miles a day. It's been actually very liberating. I recommend it to anybody who's been in a very intense job for a while. Just go walking in the crisp blue sunshine. It's a lovely thing to do. Clear your head and plan your next stage of global domination. But everywhere I've gone, everywhere, and I've never had a reaction like this at any stage of my career to anything, universal support from the British people. Universal. Old, young, black, white, it didn't matter. They've been coming up to me in their droves all day, every day, saying one of two things. Either they completely agree with me, they don't believe Meghan Markle either, or they don't agree with me, but they agree with my right to have that opinion. They agree with my right as somebody living in a supposed democracy like Britain to actually say, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. And it's one of those two things. So the British people have seen through this. And, you know, I always remind people, in Britain and America, Twitter is only 20% of the population is on Twitter. And of that, 10% make 80% of the noise. Most people aren't on social media. Most people, as regular people, walking around trying to get through a pandemic right now and watching the Duke and Duchess of Sussex from their California mansion telling the world what victims they are. And they're just like, really? Really? And then they're watching them trash our royal family, our monarchy, the Queen, at a time when her husband may have been dying. It was that serious. And they're like, and you're doing this now? Really? And then they're seeing this charge of racism envelop the royal family. And many Americans believing it. But it's not true. And it was that angered me. It was that made me so enraged on the first morning. It was that made me so enraged with the weather guy on the second morning, to the extent I walked out briefly. I did come back. I don't think America probably knows that. I came back and finished the show. But I shouldn't have done that. I should have stayed in my chair. But I was angry because I could feel that there was this growing sense that if you didn't believe Meghan Markle on everything she said, then you were the problem. You were a racist. It couldn't possibly be that she was lying. And yet here we are now, 17 lies later, and that's just the ones we've been able to check. At what point am I allowed to disbelieve her without being called a racist?
So if most people in Britain, and I think you speak for America too, see what's going on here, they see that it's a scam, they see that wokeness is really an effort by the people who are already in charge to gain more power and wealth for themselves, it so clearly is that, why is everyone putting up with it? Why in the nation that gave the rest of the world the freedom of speech, which is Great Britain, that's where that right came from, they were the first to enshrine it, why is a small percentage of the population able to impose this un-English, un-Western idea on everybody else? Like, how is this working if no one's for it?
It's completely baffling to me, and it's unbelievably terrifying. Like, what is happening to our democracies when people feel so cowed by the fear of the woke mob that they can't express an honestly held opinion without being immediately branded a racist or whatever, or callous because you don't believe that somebody could have gone to top people in a palace and said she's suicidal and needs help and was rejected by a number of people. I just find that impossible to believe. Now, I'm prepared to be proven wrong. But here we are a month later and there's still no evidence for any of this stuff. But it's not really about Meghan Markle. She's what she is. She's a delusional duchess who's on the make and wants to make millions, to hundreds of millions off her royal titles whilst trashing the royal family and everything it stands for. Fine. It's really about free speech. That's really what this is about. And what happened to me is happening all over Britain and all over America. I can take it. I've got broad shoulders. I've been in the rough and tumble of the media game a long time, like you, Tucker. We've had highs and lows, and I'm sure I'll be fine. But there are many people who don't have our platform, who are getting wiped out, eradicated, lives destroyed, careers ended, over the most ridiculous things. And it's got to stop, and it will only stop when the mass body of people who don't feel this way, who don't find themselves offended by absolutely everything, when they stand up and go, enough, I'm not going to let this happen. And ultimately, it's got to be the bosses of companies to stand firm when the mob comes and bays for blood and says, you've got to get rid of this person. He's a racist. He doesn't believe Meghan Markle. That doesn't make me a racist. What are you talking about? But bosses have to stand firm. And if they don't, this will get worse and worse and worse. But the best way to treat a bully sometimes is to smack them back in the nose. And I'm talking metaphorically, but what I mean is when this woke mob comes again for someone like this young teen Vogue editor who lost a job before she could even start, you need people at Condé Nast to go, nope, not having this. Sorry. Off you go, wokies.
You're absolutely...
She keeps her job. And by the way, if anybody in the newsroom can't work with her, even though she has apologized numerous times for tweets she deleted years ago that she wrote as a kid,
if you can't accept that she can evolve and move on and be a different person, you shouldn't be working at Team Vogue. We don't want you here. Similarly, at ITV, if I'd been running it, I'd have said, Piers is here to express his opinions. Why do you think we now have a #1 rated show on television? Because everyone's been tuning in for his opinion about the big interview. But that wasn't allowed to happen. The woke mob is a dangerous mob, and companies around the world fear it, and individuals fear it. And the only way you can defy a mob is to stand up and say, no, I'm sorry, you're not going to get your way. Put your pitchforks back, because you're not going to get your latest scalp. It's not going to happen.
You're absolutely right. The only reason we're having this conversation is because the Murdoch family, which controls Fox, is standing up in the face of the mob, and they haven't bowed. I mean, that's literally the only reason that I still have my job and that we're having this conversation. I wonder, though, isn't it the role of the press by definition?
I worked with Rupert. Yeah. I mean, I worked with Rupert Murdoch myself, and he was always somebody, and remains to this day, somebody that when the mob came for his top executives, he stood firm. He wouldn't toss you on the bonfire. He might do down the line if you were failing in your job, but not because people were offended by you or decided that you had no right to have an opinion, because he understands the power of free speech. The power of free speech, as Winston Churchill said, some people think free speech is absolutely fine, right to the point they hear an opinion that they don't like, and then it's an outrage. But that's not what free speech is. Free speech is about listening to an outrageous opinion you don't agree with and being able to accept that somebody else doesn't feel like you. That's what free speech is.
But I mean, that's the basis of, it's the basis of Western civilization, but it's also the basis specifically of journalism, a business you spent your entire life in and succeeded in. As noted, you worked at CNN, and you may disagree with the anchors there on this or that issue, but fundamentally, I thought we were all united in our bedrock commitment to freedom of speech. I watched some of its anchors attack you for stepping out of line. What did you make of that?
I was disgusted when I saw Don Lemon, someone I consider to be a friend, who's just written a very powerful book about racism. I'm looking forward to reading it. I think he's said a lot of interesting things about the issue. But to see him actually say on his show that what I'd done was an act of racism and that it was terrible that Sharon Osbourne had reacted worse to the suggestion that she might be defending a racist than the perpetrator of the act of racism was really offensive to me as someone who worked at CNN and gave it everything I had for nearly 4 years. That really disappointed me. You know, and I would like Don Lemon to think again about what he said about me on air and to be honest with himself and say, is what he's saying that by disbelieving Meghan Markle, that despite the 17 different falsehoods which have now been revealed by proper scrutiny by journalists of what was coming out of Meghan Markle's mouth, that I still have to believe her or I'm a racist, that not believing her is an act of racism. Really, Don? You really think that? You remember me, Piers Morgan, the guy that when Trayvon Martin was slain, did so much on air about that story? Did you see a racist then? Did anyone who watched my coverage after George Floyd was killed see a racist on air? Or did they see somebody who has passionately campaigned for racial equality and racial justice throughout his entire broadcasting career? Passionately. I can't think of anything worse than being called a racist. And yet here it's been casually tossed out by Cheryl Underwood on The Talk, conveniently a CBS show, perhaps protecting its asset of an interview which would never pass the normal CBS News test. They should change their name to just BS, because you could not normally broadcast all those allegations without at least allowing the people on the other end of this to respond.
That's right.
But we seem to just accept it. This is news journalism. It's not news journalism. You couldn't get away with that at CNN. And yet CNN also played into this and said when Sharon Osbourne is effectively kicked out of her job for defending me against a false charge of racism, that she shouldn't have been so angry because she should have been angrier about the act of racism. Well, what act? What did I say that was racist? What have I ever said that's ever been even remotely construable as racist towards Meghan Markle? As Sharon Osbourne said, it could be, I just don't like her.
And I don't like her because I think she's causing enormous damage to my country and its reputation, and to the monarchy, which I love, and to the royal family and the Queen. And you know what? I will keep defending them.
So I want to put, you've alluded a couple of times to the Sharon Osbourne exchange on her show, which really is pretty remarkable. And for our viewers who haven't seen it, I doubt most have, I just want to throw a clip on the screen so they get a flavor of it. Here it is.
There's something called unconscious bias, right? I don't think that everybody who is actually racist knows they're racist. I don't think that everyone who does things from a place of unconscious bias, it's called unconscious bias for a reason. Yes. You're not aware of it.
If I like Piers and he's seen as racist, then I'm racist. Is that what you're saying?
It's not the case, but I think, and again, this is uncomfortable because no one wants to challenge a friend, right, especially on national television.
So this concept of unconscious bias, you don't even need to know that you're a racist. You don't have to have racist intent in order to be a racist. If you think about it, is maybe the most insidious charge you could make against somebody. You're guilty even if you didn't.
Well, it doesn't need to be. Yeah, it doesn't need to be fact-based, does it? It can just be anything you feel. You feel someone's racist, so they are. Well, I'm a journalist. That's not how facts work. And there's a real hypocrisy at the talk as well, involving Cheryl Underwood, because 4 years ago, it was revealed after Sharon was forced out of her job for defending somebody who hadn't said racist things. A video emerged of Cheryl Underwood defending George Lopez, the Latino comedian, who had gone on stage in footage that was leaked to the media and had said there were still 2 rules of the Latino family: never marry a black woman was one of them. And a young black woman in the front row protested, got up and flipped him the bird and was angry, understandably, about what he said. He then launched into a vicious, foul-mouthed tirade at this young black woman, to the extent that she got up eventually with her friends and left the venue. Now, you would think that Cheryl Underwood, who is so outraged by people saying racist things, that she even imagines them saying it when they haven't, that when she was confronted with clear evidence on video of her good friend George Lopez saying racist things and abusing a young black woman who then had to leave a venue, that Cheryl would be outraged. But she wasn't. She defended George Lopez on the talk 4 days later. So there's a real sickening hypocrisy. I'm staggered Cheryl Underwood was still on that show. How could you be on a show where you falsely brand somebody a racist, and when you're challenged about it, you can't produce any evidence? Isn't that, by the Sharon Osbourne scale of dismissal, isn't that a fireable offence? I'd say so. But there lies the hypocrisy at the heart of this debate. I know Cheryl Underwood. I've been on that show many times. She knows I'm not a racist. She knows that. So she deliberately did what she did to create a firestorm with Sharon, who defended me passionately, was blindsided by the attack going on from her own colleague. And the one who has to leave is not the person falsely accusing Sharon's friend of being a racist with no evidence. It's Sharon for defending me against the fake charge. And that, to me, is outrageous. And Americans should be outraged. This is a show called The Talk. And because Sharon talked the truth, not anyone else's truth, or even her truth, just the truth. I hadn't said racist things. Because she said that, she had to go. And I found that just so disgraceful.
Well, it's totalitarian, and it tells you if they can do that to Sharon Osbourne and to you, they can do it to anybody, and maybe that's the point of crushing you. What makes this so interesting, titillating in some ways, is you do know Sharon Osbourne. Well, you know everybody. I mean, you are one of those people who kind of knows everybody. And I wonder, like, what do they think of this? And why didn't more people, and God bless Sharon Osbourne, whom I don't know, but for standing up for you, but you're friends with Simon Cowell. What does he think of this, for example?
Well, I've not spoken directly to Simon. I got a very supportive message from him privately, but it would be for him to say what he wants to say. I mean, you've got to understand, Tucker, people are fearful. You know, I thought it took enormous courage by Sharon in the middle of my firestorm, one of the most difficult days of my career. I just lost a job that I love. on a point of principle of refusing to apologise about something that I happen to believe. Sharon went on Twitter immediately, within 1 hour of the news breaking that I'd gone, and defended me and my right to have an opinion. She didn't defend everything I'd said. She was already on record from the day before as saying she disagreed with me about a lot of things. We've had screaming arguments in the past, Sharon and I. Screaming arguments about issues where we disagree. But when it really mattered, when the chips were down for me, she was there. She was a loyal friend. And my God, has she paid for that loyalty. And Americans, it's like a second home to me, America. I have a home in LA. I've worked and lived in America on and off for 15, 16 years. I love the place. I did America's Got Talent for 6 seasons. I toured around America to every part of it, from Chicago to Dallas to Seattle, everywhere. I loved it. I met real Americans, real people. I don't believe any Americans I've met on my travels would be comfortable with what is happening here. Would be comfortable with what happened to me, what happened to Sharon Osbourne, what happened to the editor of Teen Vogue. None of this seems American to me. It's the country of freedoms. It's the country of the constitutional right to have an opinion. It's called the First Amendment. You're allowed to have an opinion. And that opinion can be that you don't believe somebody, particularly when they're not telling the truth. That shouldn't be a fireable offence in America. Shouldn't be one in Britain.
No.
This is not why our countries went to war with fascist groups like the Nazis. And yet here we are with a new liberal form of fascism, where you either sign up to a fake narrative, you either believe something that is untrue, or you have to be destroyed. Isn't that what fascism is? Isn't that the purest personification of fascism? And my book is about that. It's about this rise of illiberal liberalism, this woke fascism. It's exactly the same thing that they profess to detest most. If you ask anyone who's really woke, they hate fascists. And yet they behave exactly the same way. They just do it from a left perspective. And it's getting worse and worse, more and more of these stories. And if you believe in freedom of speech, it is incumbent on you now to stand up against this. Whoever you are, whatever business you're working in, the right to have an opinion is at the bedrock of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, or it was last time I checked. So let's fight for that right. People have died on that hill. They've literally died in trenches against the Nazis. They've died for the right for you to have an opinion, for you to have your freedom. Because if the Nazis had prevailed, then we in Britain would not have that right. We would not be able to express our freely held opinion. It would be like North Korea, where if you express an opinion against the ruler, you get killed. Is that where we want to go in Britain and America? Is that the next stage of this, where simply people losing their jobs or being cancelled is not enough for the woke mob, that you actually have to start killing people to make sure they don't ever say them again? This is fascism. It's the new form, and it's got to be repelled.
So this is exactly, it strikes me, listening to you, why they kind of had to crush you. I mean, because you're not a conservative ideologue, for one thing. You're a self-described liberal. You've been around a long time. You're credible. You say what you think. That's obvious. And you have a growing audience, a big, big audience. The second you wrote that book, and you kind of made it all explicit, I'm for traditional liberalism, the freedom of conscience that is guaranteed in any free society. The second you said that out loud, did it occur to you that maybe they kind of have to crush me now?
Well, I actually joked in the book. It wasn't really a joke, actually. I said, I'm lucky enough that despite many attempts to cancel me, my bosses at ITV have always stood firm, and to their credit, they had. But it was kind of one mob attack too many for them. But there is an irony. That's actually in the book. But, you know, you mentioned the book. So the paperback came out last week, but the hardback had kind of, you know, done its job. It'd been out for 3-4 months, and I'd moved on to the paperback. But a very interesting thing happened in the week I was let go. On the Tuesday, it was number 2,100 on the Amazon chart. By Saturday morning, it was number 1. That's the British people. That's the British people going, we're not having this. Sorry. We may not even agree with this guy. part of the reason I think my show was so appealing, Good Morning Britain, the way that I did it, was that you didn't have to agree with me. In fact, I liked it if half the audience was throwing stuff at the TV. I wanted them to be passionate. I described it regularly as the BBC was like having a frothy latte, which would probably send you back to sleep. They were our rival show, and we were the double espresso shot to try and wake you up in the morning and get you thinking about stuff that matters, and to argue with yourselves, your friends, your family, but do it in a civilized manner where you can agree to disagree. So many families, Tucker, I detect now, are getting split by this mentality that if you have a family member who doesn't agree with you, maybe they supported Donald Trump or whatever it may be, and you don't like Trump. And I'm someone who has known Trump a long time, liked him personally, still like him personally, fell out with him in the last year because I disagreed with the way he handled the pandemic and other issues. But I would never fall out with a family member for saying they liked or voted for Donald Trump. And yet it's happening all over America. Same thing happening in Britain with Brexit, the decision by Britain to leave the European Union. Splitting families, breaking up friendships, because people cannot tolerate a different view. Even though with Brexit, 17 million people voted for it, 17 million odd voted against it. So half the country didn't agree with the result. So show each other a bit of respect. It's called a democracy. But we're losing it. And if we lose freedom of speech, this is the point I make at the end of my book. If we lose the right to have an opinion, the right to respect other opinions, then ultimately democracy dies. It's the bedrock of democracy. You then become something different. You become a totalitarian state run by an illiberal mob now, who are the new fascists. Is that what anybody wants? Do liberals want that? Because I don't want that, and I'm a liberal.
I have to ask, since you brought it up, how is your family handling this? So you have children. I mean, they've seen their father denounced as a racist. That's not a small thing. It's the most serious charge you can level in our societies at the moment. How are they reacting to that?
I would say that the Monday, when I went off about the interview, was the most difficult day for... I've got 3 sons in their 20s and a young 9-year-old daughter. She was kind of cocooned from it, but the boys were exposed to some of the most vicious abuse they've ever had in their lives purely by default. Nobody cared what their view of Meghan Markle or Prince Harry was. And by the way, they don't care, any of them, about either of them, and think there are far more important things to worry about. But certainly we disagree about stuff all the time. But they were being targeted all over social media in a very deliberate way, as was anybody. A female journalist on the Daily Telegraph wrote very movingly about the appalling abuse she's had whenever she criticises Meghan Markle. Again online, again very orchestrated. So my kids had it very rough for a day or two. And, you know, a lot of tension building. And then it all changed after I came out, after I was let go. I came out to find a wall of photographers. I was taking my daughter to school. We were walking to school. And she stood at my side, and I just said, I wasn't going to say anything, and something bubbled up inside me. And I went, you know what? Here's the bottom line with this. If you want to believe Meghan Markle, I'm fine with that. That's your right. You're allowed to believe her. You're allowed to believe every word. You're allowed to agree with everything she says. But in a democracy, I'm allowed to say I don't believe her. I'm allowed as a journalist to challenge untruths. That's my job. And there was something about what I said on the steps there which clearly resonated with the public, and it resonated with my son's friendship groups, because the mood, they said, changed almost instantaneously to a new mood of, well, yeah, you should be allowed an opinion. And that's the way it's gone in Britain. I feel like it hasn't gone that way yet in America, because how many people have done what I'm doing now with you and actually gone through all these lies in this interview?
Yes.
Or delusions, whatever you want to call them. I'm not seeing it on American television. It's like they had their say, it wasn't really challenged by Oprah, therefore it must all be true. When actually most of it that's been checked has turned out to be untrue. And yet here I am, out of a job that I loved, on the day we smashed ratings records and finally beat the opposition, a day that most networks would probably have a party to celebrate if we weren't in a pandemic, and I get invited to leave because I won't believe a liar.
it's kind of ridiculous.
It's ridiculous, but it's also inspiring to watch, because what you're seeing is one man's bravery become the catalyst for a broader resistance to this fascism, which is entirely real. I want to put this on the screen, actually. This is London, March 10th, right after it happened. This is what you said at the time that you posted. You posted this video right after you left the show, for our viewers who haven't seen it. Here it is.
I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in the right to be allowed to have an opinion. If people want to believe Meghan Markle, that's entirely their right. I don't believe almost anything that comes out of her mouth, and I think the damage she's done to the British monarchy and to the Queen at a time when Prince Philip is lying in hospital is enormous and frankly contemptible. So if I have to fall on my sword for expressing an honestly held opinion about Meghan Markle and that diatribe of bilge that she came out with in that interview, so be it.
I love how you phrase it. But more than anything, I love that you did it. That's all it took to preserve your dignity, to become a beacon of inspiration to a lot of other people who are being oppressed, and, by the way, to guarantee that you will have another job. Like, why is that so hard for people to do?
Yeah. Listen, groveling to the woke brigade doesn't get you anywhere. It's a complete non-starter. They just take that as a sign that you're weak and they can go harder. And they'll go harder until they cancel you. And then they move on to the next one. The only way to beat them is to make it clear to them that you can't be cancelled. These people can't cancel me. I won't be cancelled. I'll carry on being me. But, you know, you hit on a thing there about keeping your dignity. I can look in the mirror and see somebody pretty flawed in many ways. I'm not pretending to be Mother Teresa. But I can look at somebody who has always in my career, when I've reached big pivotal moments, acted, I believe, on a point of principle. And it's cost me big jobs in the past. You know, my position about guns at CNN was probably the main reason that I left in the end. My position about the Iraq War, I was very anti the Iraq War, cost me my job at the Daily Mirror, where I was the editor-in-chief for 10 years. So, you know, I've probably taught myself out of jobs with positions I've taken, but they've always been honestly held opinions. They've always been what I really believe. And if you get traduced or bullied into saying what you don't believe, or into apologizing for stuff you do believe, then you're surrendering. You're surrendering to a mob that wants you to do just that. And, you know, my hero is Sir Winston Churchill. He never surrendered to anybody ever. And that's why he was recently voted the greatest Briton of all time. And that's why I've got 3 or 4 pictures of him. I actually bought one of his half-smoked cigars recently for about $5,000. Money well spent, Tucker. I look at that half-smoked cigar. It was smoked on a boat and kept by a chaplain. And I look at that for inspiration whenever I'm thinking about rolling over or surrendering or giving up. And I try and invoke, obviously no one can invoke his spirit, but you can invoke part of his spirit. Just never give up and never give in on a point of principle. Stand up for what you believe in. As Churchill himself said, if you've got enemies, good, because it means you stood up for something you believe in sometime in your life. Isn't that a good maxim for all of us to have in life?
Yes.
Stand up for what you believe in. I tell my kids every day when I speak to them, just say what you think. Stand up for what you believe in. Never be bullied into what to think. You live in a democracy where the freedom was won by young men. You know, my sons are in their 20s. Men younger than them, millions, went to war to fight for their right to have freedom. And it's a right we should never take lightly.
Bravery is the indispensable virtue. We're definitely learning that. Last question to you, because I can't resist. What are you doing next?
Well, I've had some very interesting offers. My normal strategy when something like this happens is to take a few months off to get a bit fit. Breakfast TV is pretty punishing on the torso. And I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to go on long walks. I'm going to get fit. I'm going to
scheme and plot my next stage of global domination. And I'm sure whatever it'll be will be something I haven't probably even thought of, that will be exciting and fun, because the media world is a wonderful world to be in. I love it. I thrive on it, good, bad and ugly. I don't even see this as a bad experience in my life. I see it actually as one of the best and most affirmative experiences. The real experience where my lived experience of the last 4 weeks has been that actually most reasonable people either agree with me or agree with my right to have my opinions. And that meant a lot to me. Watching the book do so well, watching the reaction from people in the street, the emails I've had, the tweets, everything really has just been one long, all singing, all dancing affirmation of the right to freedom of speech. And when I think about all the causes which I battled over the years, as a journalist all my life, and wanting to be one from when I was a kid, 6, 7, the fundamental bedrock of being a journalist is freedom of speech. The right to infuriate, the right to annoy, the right to cause outrage, the right to express vehemently held opinions. All those are enshrined under freedom of speech and your right to do it. And we've got to protect that with every fibre of our being. Not just journalists, but anybody in the public who values their right to think how they want to think and to say what they want to say. Because that's what made Britain and America two such great countries and such beacons of freedom of speech. And right now, that's under attack like I've never seen it.
It's inspiring. We're rooting for you. I hope you join us here. Piers Morgan, thank you for telling us that story. Great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Tucker Carlson, today's the name of the show. New episodes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Fox Nation. We'll see you at 8 p.m. every weeknight on the News Channel.